A Chinese Navy frigate that used to carry a handful of missiles is now being built, or rebuilt, to carry dozens more. Not a new warship. Same hull, same tonnage, but a missile magazine that's quietly gotten a lot bigger. A report from Asia Times says China's Navy is retrofitting part of its frigate fleet with additional vertical launch missile cells, adding strike capability and air defense capacity to ships that, until recently, carried noticeably lighter loadouts. That one change, more missile tubes on the same ship, says something bigger about how China is choosing to grow its Navy. Not by building a fleet of expensive destroyers from scratch, by making its existing mid-tier ships punch closer to that weight class. So what is a vertical launch system, and why does adding cells to a frigate matter tactically and not just numerically? What's confirmed about this upgrade, and what's still early or unverified? And why would a Navy that's already building destroyers at a remarkable pace also bother upgrading its frigates? That's what this video walks through. The mechanics of the upgrade, the doctrine behind it, and where the reporting currently stands. Let's start with the basics, because they matter for understanding why this upgrade is significant at all. A frigate, in modern naval terms, sits in the middle tier of surface combatants. Smaller and cheaper than a destroyer, larger and more capable than a corvette. Navies build them because they're relatively affordable to produce in numbers, and because not every mission needs a full destroyer's price tag and crew size. China's principal frigate class today is the Type 054A, a roughly 400-ton ship that's been the backbone of its frigate fleet for close to 2 decades, built and commissioned in large numbers. The vertical launch system, or VLS, is the part that matters here, instead of a single missile launcher that has to reload between shots. The older, slower method. A VLS is a grid of individual tubes built into the deck, each one able to fire independently and almost simultaneously. More cells means more missiles ready to fire without reloading, and it means different missile types can be loaded into the same set of tubes. Anti-air missiles in some cells, anti-ship or land attack missiles in others. VLS cell count is one of the most direct, comparable measures of a warship's combat capacity. Analysts track it almost the way sports analysts track a team's roster. Line up the numbers across ship classes and something stands out. The gap between what China's frigates carry and what its destroyers carry has been unusually wide. A Type 054A frigate has typically fielded around 32 VLS cells. China's newer Type 052D destroyers carry 64. Its largest destroyers, the Type 055, carry 112. That's roughly triple to quadruple the firepower, ship for ship, once you count launch cells. According to Asia Times, the retrofit effort is aimed at narrowing exactly that gap. Adding vertical launch capacity to frigate-class hulls so they carry a heavier magazine than before, without the years and expense of designing and mass-producing an entirely new class of destroyer. Here's where the story gets harder to pin down, and it's worth being upfront about that. Retrofitting a warship with more missile cells isn't a simple bolt-on job. A hull has a fixed amount of internal volume and a fixed weight budget. Adding a deeper or wider VLS module usually means cutting into other space, adjusting the ship's center of gravity, and sometimes extending or modifying the hull itself. That's a real engineering problem, and it's part of why open-source reporting on programs like this tends to lag behind the actual shipyard work. Outside analysts are largely working from satellite imagery, shipyard photographs, and official statements that don't always spell out technical specifics. So let's be precise about what's actually confirmed. The direction of the upgrade, more cells, more strike and air defense capacity, is reported. The exact number of cells being added and which hulls are getting retrofitted versus which are new-build ships incorporating it from the start isn't something we're going to state as settled fact because the sourcing available doesn't support that level of detail yet. What is clear is the logic behind it. And once you understand that logic, the individual hull numbers matter a lot less than the pattern. Because this isn't really a story about one ship. It's a story about how a Navy chooses to spend its money. Building a destroyer from the keel up is expensive and slow, even for a shipbuilding program with the output China has demonstrated over the past decade. A frigate hull that already exists, with a trained crew and an established production line, is a much cheaper and faster platform to upgrade. Add a meaningful fraction of a destroyer's firepower to a ship that costs a fraction of a destroyer's price, and you get more total combat capacity across the fleet for the same shipbuilding budget. That's the trade-off here. Not a replacement for destroyer construction, but a parallel track that raises the floor on what the mid-tier of the fleet can do. There's broader context worth laying out, separate from this specific report. China's Navy. Officially, the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, has drawn extensive analysis over the past 15 years for the sheer pace of its shipbuilding. The U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence and several independent think tanks have described the plan as now operating the largest navy by ship count in the world, reflecting sustained investment across destroyers, frigates, corvettes, and amphibious ships. A recurring question in that analysis is quality versus quantity. Is China just building more hulls, or hulls that are individually more capable? A frigate retrofit that closes the firepower gap with destroyers fits the second category. If the reporting holds up, it's evidence Beijing is investing in making its existing fleet more lethal per ship, not just larger in headcount. There's a second complication worth naming, because it trips up a lot of reporting on military modernization. China's defense ministry doesn't routinely publish detailed specs of shipboard upgrades the way, say, the U.S. Navy discloses some program details through congressional budget documents. So most of what's known about planned retrofit programs comes from satellite imagery analyzed by outside researchers, photos circulating from Chinese shipyards, and periodic state media coverage that tends to confirm a program exists without detailing its full scope. Analysts have gotten reasonably good at reading shipyard imagery over time, spotting hull modifications, counting VLS cell covers and overhead photos. But that method has real limits. It can often confirm something is happening. It's much weaker at confirming how many ships, on what timeline, or to what final spec. So here's the real question worth sitting with. If a mid-tier frigate can now carry a much larger missile load, does the traditional line between frigate and destroyer mean as much as it used to? Navies have historically sorted ships by size and cost. Increasingly, what matters tactically is how many missiles a ship can put in the air and how fast. And that number is becoming less tightly coupled to hull size than it used to be. What strikes me about this story, honestly, is less the missile count and more what it reveals about how modern naval power gets built. For most of the 20th century, adding capability meant designing an entirely new ship. This retrofit approach, if the broader reporting holds, looks like a Navy treating magazine capacity almost like a software upgrade, something you can bolt onto an existing chassis instead of starting over. That's a genuinely different model of military growth, and other navies, including Western ones facing their own shipbuilding cost and timeline pressures, are going to be watching closely. Here's a take that'll probably split opinion in the comments. Framing this purely as an arms race story undersells what's going on. A lot of coverage of Chinese military modernization defaults to alarm. Bigger navy, more missiles, therefore more dangerous. And yes, a more heavily armed frigate fleet is, in plain terms, a more capable frigate fleet. But retrofitting existing hulls instead of building all new destroyers is also, read differently, a fairly conservative, budget-constrained approach. The kind of program a Navy runs when it wants more capability per dollar, not necessarily one preparing for a specific near-term conflict. Both readings fit the same facts, which is exactly why precision matters here more than adjectives. So I'll put it to you directly. Does a fleet-wide upgrade like this read as routine modernization, the kind every Navy does as technology improves, or as a deliberate signal aimed at a specific rival fleet in the region? There's a real case for either answer, and I'd genuinely like to know where you land. One more caveat before we get to where this stands. Asia Times, the outlet behind the original report, is a Hong Kong-based publication that covers Asian defense and geopolitics regularly and gets cited often in open-source naval analysis circles. But like most outlets covering planned programs, its reporting on specific technical details often traces back to the same limited pool of imagery analysts and unofficial sources described above. That's not a reason to dismiss the report. It's a reason to treat the headline claim. More VLS cells, more strike and air defense capacity on the frigate fleet, as the well-supported core of the story, while treating anything more granular as provisional until confirmed by additional independent sourcing or an official plan statement. Where does that leave us? The core claim is straightforward and fits the broader, well-documented pattern of plan investment. China is adding missile capacity to its frigate fleet, closing part of the gap with its destroyers and doing it without the cost of new hull construction. What remains open is the granular picture. Which hulls, how many cells, on what timeline? And that picture will likely sharpen over the coming months as more shipyard imagery and, potentially, official confirmation becomes available. That's also the honest place to end a story like this. Not every development in military reporting resolves into a clean, fully confirmed picture within a single news cycle. Sometimes the most accurate thing you can say is, here's what's solid, here's what's still developing, and here's where to watch next. If you want to track this yourself, the open-source naval watching community does a lot of that work in public. Satellite imagery trackers, shipyard photo threads, and outlets like USNI News and Naval News regularly follow up on stories like this one. Worth a look if you want to see how a story like this gets nailed down over time rather than in a single report. For now, the headline fact stands on its own. A frigate fleet built for a lighter load is being armed like it's meant to fight above its weight class. Whether that's read as modernization, deterrence, or preparation depends less on the missiles themselves than on what China's Navy chooses to do with them next. And that's a story this channel will keep following.